we will talk about tuple in this video. So what is tuple? Tuple is an immutable ordered sequence. So we can basically compare it to the list, but there's the difference that you cannot change the elements inside the tuple. But otherwise it can be used as list. You can get an element by index and so on, but it cannot be changed. So you cannot add elements, you cannot remove elements, and you cannot actually replace elements. And actually where Python uses tuple is when we want to return multiple values from the function. For example, there's a function example and it returns 3 values. And what happens here is that this 1 and 2 and 4, this is together is one tuple. How to create a tuple? We can create a tuple by using regular parentheses. So basically we create a variable elements. There are 3 values inside this tuple. Also we can create an empty tuple with just parentheses, and to get a tuple with 1 element we have to add an additional comma here, because otherwise it would be just 1 in parentheses, and this would be this is basically as number 1. So to make a difference between number 1 and tuple, we have to add this 1 comma here. But if we have more elements, then there is no difference because we already have those commas there. And we can actually create tuples without parentheses, and it's not recommended. So I can actually create a tuple without this parentheses, and it would be just 1, 2, 3. But for readability, it's recommended to use parentheses. And especially if you, the second line here, you have to add this comma here also, because otherwise there's no difference whether it's number 1 or whether it's a tuple. So yeah, but we recommend to use commas or not parentheses for tuples, as is shown here. So let's see how the list and tuple can be used. We can convert a tuple into a list. And to do that, we have a tuple elements here, and we convert it into a list using list function. Or yeah, we pass in this variable into list, or we can pass in the tuple directly without a variable. And as you can see, we will end up with a list of the same elements. And we can do vice versa. We can take a list and convert it into a tuple. And for that, we will use tuple function here. So basically, we have a list of 3 numbers. We convert it into a tuple, and then we have this tuple here. And also, we can pass in a list directly without a variable. So let's see what we can do with tuples. First thing is that we can access an element at certain index. Currently it's shown that I take the first element from the tuple, and the indices start from the 0. So basically the same as with lists. I can use slicing. This works exactly the same as with lists. Currently the example here is that I start from 0 and end up with at the element at position 3. The end index is not included, so I will get 3 first elements, 0, 1 and 2 positions. And the result of slicing is also a tuple, so basically everything else works the same as with list slicing. I can check whether an element exists in a tuple. So in this example, I check whether number 3 is inside this element's tuple. You can use it with conditional statement, for example. I can convert a string into a tuple, so every element or every symbol from the string becomes one element inside a tuple. And we can concatenate two tuples, and basically it works as expected. I will take every element from the first tuple and add every element from the second tuple. And you have to keep in mind that even though I can add two tuples, I cannot modify the tuple. For example, the first one is not modified and the second one is not modified. I will create, or the program Python creates a new tuple for me. The same goes with strings, for example. In a code, I can write that I have one string and I add, for example, space into it. But actually what happens is that it creates a new string where the space is appended. The idea is the same with tuples. So I can kind of add elements, or I can concatenate two tuples, but the result is a new tuple. I cannot modify existing tuples. What we can also do, we can pack with tuples. What it means is that I can create a variable where I add several elements, for example, 3 elements here. And this is called packing. I pack 3 values into one variable. And I can also unpack those values so that I assign 3 variables with those 3 values. This can be done with variable, but this can be also done with just values. So in Python, I could even actually drop the parentheses here. So I could just write something like that. So what happens is that I actually unpack those values into 3 variables. For example, enumerate and ticked items both work similarly. And yes, as was mentioned, the functions, the return values can be packed or unpacked. So what happens here is that there is a function which returns 2 values, hello and Tom. And now if I call this function, I can put them into one variable, for example, results or whatever, but I can also unpack those values into 2 variables. But then I actually have to know that the function returns always 2 values. But yeah, if that's the case, then you can unpack those values into 2 variables. Tuple as a key. So because tuple is immutable, we can use it as a key for dictionaries. Otherwise, dictionary does not allow us to use mutable objects. So for example, I cannot use list as a key for a dictionary, but tuples I can use. So here's an example. I have points, and every point or coordinate points to some text, for example, -1 and -1 point to P, and so on. So I can create a dictionary where every key is a basically pair of numbers. But I cannot use list here. So for example, if I try to do something like that, so I will create a dictionary where the key is a list, then I will get an error because it's not hashable. The same goes with sets, basically. I can only add immutable objects into set. So I cannot use lists there, but I can use tuples inside a set. So a summary. Tuple is basically an immutable list. So immutable means that I cannot change the value during my program. So yeah, values cannot be changed. Always returning multiple values allows us to return multiple values from a function. So if we have a function which returns, for example, 2 values, then it's actually a tuple. And yeah, we can use tuples to pack or unpack values into or from the variable. So if I want to pack 3 values into a variable, it's basically a tuple. And if I want to unpack the values from tuple into 3 variables, then we say it's unpacking. And the enumerate and ticked items return tuples. And because tuple is immutable, we can use it as a key for dictionary. And actually the same goes with set. We can use tuples inside a set.